Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Saturday morning at the Art Clinic Online. We have some incredible artists and curators today, which we will shortly introduce to you. I want to let you guys know that our next artist on September 12th is Ira Tattleman, multidisciplinary artist hosted by Julia Broom. And I also want to let you guys know that the exhibition of Susan O'Neill's drawings is still up in the Stone Tower till the end of the month. These drawings are really cool. They're kind of like a blend of gesture poses and highly rendered anatomical drawings because she was once a medical illustrator. So it's a really nice blend of expressive and technical drawings. So we're checking out. I won't be there today, but the gallery will be open from 12 to 5, both Saturday and Sunday this weekend. So go check it out. It's really cool. But I want to introduce not a stranger to our program, uh, Reem Bassous. Is that how you say your last name correctly? You'll have to correct me when I pass the torch to you. I'm
Bassous.
terrible with this. Thank you.
Sure.
Uh, was one of our more prolific artists that talked this year, right? Wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
And she's introducing our artist today, Ashleigh Coren. So I will pass it torch to you. But I would say if you have some spare time this afternoon or even tomorrow, go check out her video because it was really enlightening and incredibly well presented. So I will pass the torch to you, Reem. Thanks.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Mariana. I'm going to share a little bit about how I met Ashleigh before I talk about her credentials, which are many. I first met Ashleigh, I believe it was 2019 in Honolulu. I was at a dinner with a bunch of curators, and some of them were affiliated with the Smithsonian. And I was introduced. We just happened to be sitting next to one another, and we immediately hit it off. And she said, "If you ever come to DC, please contact me." And I remember how I just couldn't believe how warm she was. She was just so nice. And not everybody is like that, you know. And so years later, I'm in DC and I still have Ashleigh's card in my wallet. And then one day, my registrar sent me a message and said, "There is someone in our gallery who I feel like you would like to meet." She's seeing the show. It was Paula Mann and Vanessa Villarreal's show. And so I went downstairs to introduce myself, and I looked at Ashleigh and she looked at me and she's like, "Hey." And the rest is history. So I'm so happy that this happened. Ashleigh is an archivist by training. She's a content strategist, educator, and curator. She teaches at GW and, lucky for us, the Washington Studio School as well. I should say the Corcoran School of Art and Design at GW. And she's done so many projects, worked at the National Portrait Gallery, um, the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum, Smithsonian Office of Digital Transformation, is on the board of the Museum Education Roundtable. But among her very many exciting projects was one that specifically stood out to me, which was her volunteering with the Appalachian Prison Book Project, which is an all-volunteer organization that provides books and educational materials to incarcerated people. And the way I think of Ashleigh is that she's a curator with a mission. Archivists decide how information is ordered, and curators, my apologies, decide how it is presented. And so I'm not going to say much more, just that we are all very lucky today to have Ashleigh talking to us. Ashleigh, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thank you so much, Reem, and hi, Bob. How you doing? Nice to see you. Uh, Thank you so much to Reem and ACO. Thank you all so much for inviting me to speak. I love being able to meet new people. And as Reem mentioned, sort of in our origin story, a big part of my practice is literally just trying new things, opening myself up to new experiences. And the best part of that is all the wonderful people that come into my orbit, right? And I come into theirs. To me, that is the most rewarding part of my practice period. Is like just taking chances, trying new things, and then just sort of letting life happen. And all of these amazing things happen sort of when you do that. As we mentioned, my background, I'm a trained librarian and archivist. So I studied art history in college, but I don't have a PhD. I didn't, and I think that's actually really made my practice unique. So I'm going to talk a bit about me. And then I'm actually going to talk about I'm going to center three arts, and I'm so excited because one of the artworks is by my girl Denise, who is here on this call. Hi, Denise. Um, and I think these three artworks sort of really embody the heart of my practice and like what curatorial work, which to me is connected with history, dialogue, thinking about systems, and also thinking about always having sort of the past, present, and future sort of all at one at the center of my practice, how important that is in everything I do. So please bear with me as I share my slides. Okay, so again, I'm not going to get into everything about who I am, but I'm Ashleigh Coren. A big part of my identity is I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. So if you see some Boston come out, don't be afraid. Um, as Reem mentioned, I've done a bunch of different things. The past 2 years have been really interesting for my practice. I went from having a full-time job to now sort of being a consultant, and sort of doing the sort of piecemeal thing where I'm trying to figure out a career that can encompass my interest in education and curatorial work, particularly sort of centered in sort of having conversations about the past, present, and future. This is me at my former position at the National Portrait Gallery. I was, as you know, the National Portrait Gallery doesn't have a lot of Black curators in its history, but I was the women's history, content, and interpretation curator for 3.5 years at the Portrait Gallery. And my job was sort of to bridge sort of what was happening in curatorial exhibits, collections, acquisitions, and sort of audience engagement, right? So you have my people in audience engagement who are doing education, doing public programs, and then sort of like, what does that bridge look like? What does it mean to have someone who is constantly thinking about, okay, when you're acquiring this object, how can it be used for storytelling? How can it be used for education, right? If you're creating this exhibition, what are you thinking about in terms of how can this be used for community building, right? Like, what are the things that you can do with this amazing content? And so in addition to sort of doing traditional curatorial work like making labels and doing research, I was also centered in women's history. So sort of thinking about gender as a subject and how collections, specifically portraiture, can help us understand how we understand gender. And so sort of this idea of using collections, using spaces to sort of bring conversations to the forefront. And so that's sort of my start of my career, sort of as a curator, was at the National Portrait Gallery. And that's me, and John Leguizamo is hanging out behind me in this picture. So I refer to myself as a content strategist. I love the word curator, but to me, content strategy actually is a better fit. And I kind of wanted to break down what content strategy actually is, or how I define content strategy. Because sometimes, people use these like big jargony words, and you're like, I don't even know what you do for a living. Like, I just see words. I just see words that I don't quite understand. They sound like corporate talk. And so I actually wanted to break down content strategy, which is like, for me, I love the puzzle of thinking about when I'm in an organization or consulting with an organization, whether it be the Washington Studio School or the National Museum of the American Latino or, the Phillips Collection. Okay, what are your assets, right? What are the things that you all have And these assets could be your collections, right? Your objects, the resources, the building, right? Your Wi-Fi, your spaces, like all of these resources that you all have in these spaces, your staff, their expertise, right? The history of the space, your positioning in your community. Like, what are all of these assets that these organizations have, and your expertise, right? And the strategy part is like, how are these assets deployed to either answer a question, spark dialogue, in service of a specific goal, right? So for me, an exhibition is not just like, oh, I'm interested in the subject, let me put an exhibition up. It's like, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to say? What are you trying to ignite? What are you in this day and age, like how does this thing help us understand ourselves or the world around us? And so for me, that's kind of how I approach my practice, right? Is this idea of content strategy. Because to me, everything is about education. So, and about learning and about sharing. And again, I kind of want to go back to this idea of like information, right? We mentioned that I am a trained archivist. So information is at the center of all of this for me. How is information created? How is it organized and described? How is it shared? And then how is it processed? I taught a class for Washington Studio School recently where we spent one every week looking at a work of art that people hate or feel very mixed feelings about, right? We talked about Martha Rothko. We talked, people's discomfort with abstract art. Believe me, I've seen it. You don't know how many times I've been on the floor and then be like, my tax dollars are paying for this, right? Like this idea that like people have very strong feelings about certain genres. Also, how is it organized? How is information organized, right? When you're designing a show, when you're curating a show, one of the fun parts about doing the exhibit I did at Washington Studio School was that Reem and I, once we had all of the objects on the floor, right? Where do we place things on the wall? Where do we put things, right? And for me, that's that question, how is information organized? Because when people are walking into a space, that is all purposeful, right? You want people to experience certain things at certain points in a physical space or digital space. So how are you organizing information to think about the experience they're going to have as they're walking through an exhibition, as they're walking through a display, as they're exploring something, right? And then how is it shared? Thinking about labels, thinking about programming, thinking about even marketing of these exhibitions, right? How is this information shared? How are we in sync with the artists that are in our show in terms of how do we describe what's happening, what we're doing, what they're doing? Do they want us to actually describe what it is that they're doing? Sometimes they don't. And then again, how is it processed, right? And that goes back to the audience. How are our audiences like absorbing and engaging with these objects and these shows on our websites, on our social media, like all over? So to me, that's sort of really sort of the core of like thinking about content strategy and then sort of thinking about it as information. And so I wanted to sort of center three different works because in addition to being a curator and a content strategist and an educator, I'm also an art collector. Because what I realized is that being a curator, it's also like supporting artists. One way you can support artists is having them in your show, but to also think about emerging talent and what it means to support emerging talent. And I wanted to take my support a step further by being a collector. And then also sort of thinking about designing my own sort of space and my home, and what that would look like. So I wanted to talk about two objects that are actually in my collection, and sort of one object in particular that really sort of gets at the heart of like why I do what I do. I mean, these are all why I do what I do, but this particular object really focuses on why I do what I do. So this is Denise's work again. Hey, Denise. This is Upward Bound. Remembering Ella Watson from 2024. I met Denise in 2022, sort of my first sort of outside of Smithsonian experience doing curatorial work. I did a show for the New Art School in Newton, Massachusetts. And it was sort of it was an open call. And Denise was one of the individuals who submitted work for the show. And I love a good story, like love a good story. So Denise story kind of reminded me a little bit of Alma Thomas. So if you're familiar with the story of Alma Thomas was an artist who, for the majority of her life, was a working artist, but really didn't break through until after she had retired. So well into her 60s and 70s was sort of her breakthrough. And although Denise is not quite at that age, she had a very similar story. This person who, at a later age, decided to start painting, decided to become an artist. And we really kind of connected over the fact of sort of being two Black women. Well, one, Denise is exceptionally talented. But two, being sort of Black women and sort of thinking about the barriers to entering the art space. And there's so many sort of invisible barriers, thinking about class, thinking about race, thinking about training, thinking about networking. And we sort of really connected to how many of us in this space, whether you're an artist or a curator or whatever, we kind of have to create our own experiences for ourselves because the opportunities are not necessarily always there. Even for someone like me, I was working for the Smithsonian and I still couldn't find curatorial opportunities to both design and mount shows. So I kind of had to like go outside and like find my own opportunities to sort of get that experience. And so we really connected. And I've been in touch with Denise. She's a dear friend of mine. And then a few years ago, I was able to actually collect one of her objects. Or acquire one of her objects. And for me, this one really stood out. Again, I'm an archivist. Does anyone recognize this image? Does this ring a bell to anybody? Does it remind anybody of anything? Okay, Reem, does this remind you of anything?
Yes, the painting of the couple.
Yes, exactly.
I can't place the name right
Yep,
now.
Gothic, American Gothic, right? So there's two references to this painting. One, American Gothic, right? Sort of the famous painting, quintessential American, right? Like very, very much has become this sort of American symbol. So that happened. But the other reference is Gordon Parks, the famous Black photographer Gordon Parks, um, did a photograph inspired by American Gothic with this woman who was a part of the maintenance staff where he was, named Ella Watson. And so this is Gordon Parks' version of American Gothic from 1942. This is Ella Watson. And so this particular painting is inspired by both the original painting and which was the photograph, which was inspired by American Gothic, right? So there's sort of like this like meta story going on. And again, right, this idea of like information, where stuff comes from, how information is created, how new information is created. Because when you go from American Gothic, this sort of white couple, right, in front of this house in this sort of rural setting to this, right? This African American woman in the 1940s to this, right? And I was like, I have to have this painting. It's so wonderful. It's so beautiful. I love Denise's style. And I wanted something in my collection. Like I have a lot of artwork by Black women in my own personal collection, particularly of, portraits or representations of Black womanhood. And I just really loved the fact that there was sort of this historical reference, but it was sort of made into something new, right? You see the phone in her pocket, which makes it very 21st century. You see kind of the iPhone in her pocket, in her dress pocket. And so I love this idea of reinventing, sort of thinking about, but also sort of, again, being connected to history at the same time. So I really, really love this portrait. Please check out Denise's work. It is fabulous. And Denise is just a great person as well. So, and check out Gordon Parks' work too. He is the best. And then I don't own this, but this is a work of art or an artist that is very dear to me, who was only introduced to me a couple of years ago. I had the privilege of returning to Bates College for a tour, and I was introduced to the work of Donna Ferrato, who is a photojournalist turned artist. You probably have seen some of her work. A lot of her work sort of deals with the domestic space, particularly partner to partner violence. And again, sort of my background in women's history, and sort of thinking about how exhibits and artwork can also tell difficult stories and difficult histories, which is also something that's very important to me, is to like be able to have a space to sort of talk about or to have nuanced conversations about things like race and gender, and power. So this is an object from 1987. This is 8-year-old Diamond shouts at his father as the police arrest him for domestic violence. This is from 1986. And this is not necessarily an art object, right? This is an object that was a part of a newspaper article that later became an art object once Donna Ferrato's work got more visibility and she became an artist with a capital A, right? So I love sort of the story behind her work and this portrait. But, because I teach museum studies and I do a lot with race and gender, I think this particular object is so fascinating to me because it's kind of when I use this object in my classroom, it's not necessarily a litmus test, but it's a really interesting way to see how people react and interpret works of art such as this, right? This is a very complex and layered situation. In this particular artwork, this gentleman is being taken away by white officers, while his 8-year-old son, who called these officers to come to the home to protect his mother, who's sort of there in the background behind the officer with the buzz cut. And this sort of thinking about like power, but also thinking about, right, there's all these really interesting conversations about how Black children are adultified, right, in our society. Thinking about sort of this Black woman in the background and this like really complicated and hard dynamic between this gentleman and these police officers too as well, right? Thinking about the history of our own country, and like all these sort of relationships being sort of played out in front of this camera, right? So on top of everything that's happening, this is also being played out in front of someone who's a photographer that's just in their home, right? And so for me, this picture is really important to me in terms of getting people to sort of think about this relationship between how information is communicated and created. Because when we're looking at photographs, everybody knows when we're looking at a photograph, you're not seeing necessarily what is happening. You're seeing a snapshot from a person's particular point of view, right? We don't know the full story. We get parts of it. We don't get all of it. There's stuff missing. And I think the usage of objects such as this in my practice, when I'm doing exhibits, when I'm teaching, is really important because I want my students to think about when they're curating exhibits. I want them to be very mindful and very conscientious of how people could interpret things and the many different types of interpretations, and to sort of be ready to sort of think about how to encourage people to be more critical and nuanced in their interpretation of these objects, to think about their positionality and why they might assume certain things about the people in these photographs. I don't know if it's okay for me to tell the story, Reem, about the artist who pulled their work from my show.
Yes, of course.
When I did the show at Washington Studio School last fall, we had an artist pull their work from a show because originally they had submitted 3 photographs from, an event, a very big event that happened in 2025. And I chose one particular object because I thought it was the most compelling of the objects, and had more of a story there. And the artist did not want me to just present just one. They sort of wanted the full triptych, right? The full triptych of objects. But I felt that the full triptych of objects didn't quite have the power as this one image. Which normally, right, you want to show the full triptych in a show, or sometimes you want to show the full triptych. But I was like, no, the other objects, I think the other photographs actually, I think, take away from the power and the sort of challenging the audience to think very critically about what they think about this object. And the artist didn't want that, and so pulled their photograph from the show, which I totally respect, right? It's your work as a curator. I want to respect like how you want your work to be displayed. That is not my place to tell you how you want your work to be displayed, right? I don't think that at all. But it was a really interesting, but I was so disappointed because like this, I want to provide opportunities for people to not be so, I hate to use this term, black and white about how we think about race and gender in this country. And I think that when you are in a position to do that, you should take that risk. Um, and so that's why images like this mean a lot to me. They're very hard to look at. They're very hard to talk about. But we are in a particular space right now where we're increasingly being asked to not think or talk about such things. And I think that in my work, it's become increasingly important to do so.
I'm so curious to see what that triptych looks like.
I know.
It's
It
killing me
was
now.
also to me, one of the pictures was like a little creepy. So I was like, I don't want to look at that, right? Because it's also like, this is my show. I don't want to be creeped out in my own show. Okay, this is the final image. This is Ade Jones, an artist who was also in my show at the Washington Studio School. This is called For Free, question mark, from 2025. And Ade is a 24-year-old artist who was just, again, I'm very interested in emerging talent. Um, I think also working at the Smithsonian and seeing and working with established artists, I'm like, I want to work with emerging talent. That's where it's at. Y'all are fine. Um, but this is for free. And although Ade has been making art for a very long time, he's recently started exhibiting his work, right? So the Washington Studio School was one of the first shows he had ever been in, ever. And I was so drawn to his work. The archivist in me was like, where does this image come from? And I asked Ade, and he found it on Pinterest. He found it on Pinterest. And so he didn't actually know where this original image came from. He had found it online, right? Because that's how art is being made, right? People are sourcing content online, right? And being inspired by what they encounter online, which yeah, this is where we are right now, right? Where young artists are sort of sourcing content, right? Artists in the past would source content from magazines and books, you know what I mean? Like, and now it's online, right? And so Ade found this image and then created this really wonderful graphic. The text on it, if you can't see it, it says, "Justice ain't free, therefore justice ain't me." And there are these sort of two young people on the statue. And when he said he didn't know where it came from, I was like, sir, we're going to figure out the origin of this image. This image is not going to be in my show if I don't know where this image came from. Okay, it's clearly a very important image. Turns out, it is a photograph from when the Black Panthers took over the California Capitol in the 1960s. This is an image of two young people. And Ade and I also had a really interesting conversation because, right, I worked at the Portrait Gallery. If you've been to the Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., there's these like grand steps before you walk into the museum. And there are tons of schools. It's in Chinatown. It's a hangout area. There are teenagers everywhere. And for the years that I worked there, I would see teenagers post up on the stairs. They would never come inside. They'd hang out on the stairs. They'd make out on the stairs. They'd have snacks on the stairs. They would not come inside the museum, right? And some of us know why they don't come inside the museum because they don't feel like they belong in the museum, right? And so I've been always so fascinated by the concept of people reclaiming space where they want to, right? They don't necessarily need to come into the museum because they already have their space. They've claimed this outside area that's theirs. And I love that connection of these young people claiming this space that was not meant for them, right? This capital, these capitals, these statues that are not meant for them, and taking it over and making it theirs. You know what I mean? Along with a group of other amazing individuals that were sort of reclaiming this space in protest of the treatment of African Americans across the world. And so unpacking that history of this image, one was super fun, but created an extra dimension to this image, sort of thinking about his historical context in conversation with sort of the other objects that were sort of in the show, made it like really rich or even more rich than it originally was. And so I just love these moments where I can connect with artists, but also sort of really dive deep into the work and sort of find more connections, sort of more layers to sort of help tell a broader and richer story about how art can help us sort of understand where we were, but also where we are right now. So, all right, I will stop talking.
Ashley, when you exhibit like a piece like that, is it just imagery? Are you using other things like sound or
Oh yeah.
sculpture? Like, wh- what's
Oh,
kind of like a
yeah,
how would
that's a
you
great question.
create something
So
like that?
unfortunately, Jordan, I'm into everything. Everything. I love it all. I like sculpture. I love fiber arts. So when I did the show at WSS, Reem remembers we had all sorts of formats, right? All sorts of media. And then in my very first show, I actually had not just sound, but I had a performance. So I had a recorded performance in that first show. There was a dancer and choreographer who had submitted a piece that was like this 5 minute dance that was in the show. And we just had it on the TV and just like on a loop. Um, I am a little weird about sound just because I'm really sensitive to the fact that sound can actually be really distracting for people in a space, and too much sound um, kind of shuts people off in terms of wanting to physically be somewhere. And so while I like sound, I'm more interested in visual. Like I love video, I love animation, like I love including stuff like that. But I have to be very, very picky with sound. So,
Mhm. Yeah, I was just thinking. I mean, the last image by Ade, like I immediately thought of like, oh, it's like kind of Lamar, Pimp a Butterfly, like
yes,
the album
exactly,
cover.
exactly,
It's
exactly.
it's that kind of reclaiming the kind of what
Yes.
was rightfully, yeah. That I mean, I was thinking, oh God, this needs to be in like the fold out part because it's
Yes.
iconic imagery. But I was thinking, God, you need something to pair with that. And I was thinking as a sorry content strategist, like how do you
Mhm.
if there is a piece missing in a show like that element of sound, you go searching for it, or is it you have to kind of sift through what was given to you and kind of
I
make it work?
Yeah, I basically have to sift through it with I'm really lucky though, Jordan, with an artist like Ade, he's always thinking about music. So I bet you right now, if we brought in Ade, I'd be like, Ade, do you have a playlist for this? He probably, like, seriously, he probably would. And so particularly like when working with younger people, like I feel like they're always, and I think even Denise in your work, you're thinking about music too as well when you're sort of making work. And I rely on them to help me figure that out when I'm doing this work. Right. And like, yeah, the Kendrick Lamar, like his, if you look at Ade's work, you see Kendrick Lamar a lot in his work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I was also thinking, well, now I lost my train of thought. So let me
yeah.
go. I'll pass it out and then I'll come back to it.
Ashley, I
Yeah.
have a question. I was wondering if you would like to talk a little bit about the upcoming show that you're curating at the Washington Studio School in March of 27.
Thank you, Reem. So I'm doing something a little bit different for my show in March 2027 at Washington Studio School. So Denise knows once I know you, I love you, I'll use you for everything. Like it's a done deal, right? That's what the best curators do. They have their artists that they love and they meet new ones and bring them along and they bring them into their orbit. Um, but so two of the artists that were in my show, Vajo, and Ian Housting, um, even when I'm curating existing shows, I'm also thinking about future shows. I'm also thinking about future shows just because when you're around so many wonderful works of art, like it's easy to think about, oh, like maybe I could do something with this, or like maybe like these two should like pair up. And so I've been thinking about moving away specifically from sort of sociocultural sort of themed shows to sort of thinking like dialing it back and making it simpler. So instead of like this is a show about like disruption or this is a show about healing or this is a show about X, I was like, what if so these two artists, Ian and Jawe, who goes by Vajo, use a lot of the color black in their work, right? And so with Ian, black is also helps him think about absence, excuse me, and some of the things that he creates, right? Like the color black sort of being used to sort of think about in contrast with like light, right? I guess that's what I'm referring to. And Jawe uses black, but also uses a lot of neon colors. So a lot of his work, like the background is black, but there's like a lot of like dynamic color. Um, and I kept thinking about too, like they're both using very different shades of black. And I was like, I normally don't get to see the exploration of color and how colors get created and used to tell stories very often, particularly the color black, right? Because black is a color that is used to highlight sometimes other things. And I was like, what if I thought about a show that really focuses on that, but focuses on like the different shades of black, how you make different shades of black to sort of think about how this particular color and its usage could sort of help audiences understand how that sort of brings out other things in the work, whether it be thinking about light, whether it be thinking about color, but also how we take black for granted, right? We're just like, oh, neutral, black, right? And in this show, I want to say that black is actually not a neutral. It's not a neutral color. It's way more dynamic and complex than that. And I think these two artists will help me do that. So,
I absolutely love that because when you think about just in a raw pigment form, if you have like ivory black or Mars black,
yeah,
it's fine. But if you mix a black with like quinacridone magenta, phthalo green, and an ultramarine blue, you get like this most dynamic or rich
yeah,
black that you've ever seen. And you think about like, well, when color comes together, it creates a richer black than
yep,
if you just have a straight out of the tube, like go purchase it for $10 kind of thing.
yeah, exactly.
I love that. I love that. That's cool. I was actually thinking, and before I lost my train of thought, and I'm not to like
Yep.
completely change gears, but Julia Bloom is one of our constant kind of contributors to our program, and she runs Freight Gallery, which is like a non-traditional art space. And I was kind of curious as a content strategy gallery kind of person, like how do you think about non-traditional ways of exhibiting work, and how does that work with how you operate?
Oh, I love that. Excuse my language. I love that shit. Like, I love it. Right. Like, it was just so, it was, this is actually really funny because I was talking to somebody. I was like, if I could, my dream job would just be like the person who chooses art for like hotels or the person who chooses art for like office spaces. Right. Um, and it was funny. I was thinking about, this is not related, but I was thinking about, in Boston, where I'm from, Boston has a very rich mural culture, particularly with Black artists, right? Like a very rich mural culture. And I was just in Detroit, and Detroit has its own mural culture. And I kept thinking about like how this work elevates a space, right? It's supposed to not just beautify, but like inspire, like bring joy. I've been thinking a lot about um, design. And one of the people that I look up to a lot, and I'm going to mess up her name, and I'm so sorry. I think her name is Lori Brown, and she's an architect. And Lori designs like not just, traditional stuff. She also designs like birthing centers, and she redesigns like housing shelters, right? Like homeless shelters, right? And I'm thinking like, yeah, like why aren't those spaces dedicated to having art there, right? Like, shouldn't individuals, regardless of where they are, where they're from, what their circumstances in life, be able to engage with art on a daily basis? So I love the idea of thinking about where are the spaces where people could actually benefit from engaging with art in any capacity that are not in a museum. The museum is not the destination, in my opinion. Museums are wonderful, but they should not be the end all be all. You should be able to enjoy art wherever it is that you are. And so I think about people like Lori Brown who are designing these birthing centers, who are thinking about, redesigning like homeless shelters for women, right? Like these are the spaces that like really interest me, or like schools, right? Like I think those to me are way more exciting than like thinking about a traditional gallery space, um because you get to think about why this matters so much, and the long lasting impact, right? You put stuff in a gallery, it's up for a month, it goes down. But in a house, in a hotel, in a birthing center, it stays there, right? And so that really really interests me.
And Ashleigh, it also, when we think of democratizing art and bringing it to the people rather than expecting the public to go into a museum, which in DC, I realize many are free, but all over the country, they are
Yep.
not.
Yep.
Um, for so long, that democratization took the form of street art,
Hmm.
but
Mhm.
I would very much like an alternative to that
Yeah.
because it is one thing, it is not everything. And so these ideas are exciting, especially when you see the work of someone like Nikisha
Yep. Yep.
Jarrett, one of our own here in DC. So yeah, I'm all for that. Any way I can help.
Yeah. And I mean, think about where do people go? They go to the library. You know what I mean? Like they go to the library, they go to the post office. You know what I mean? Like where are the places that people are going on the daily, where there should be enjoying art. And it doesn't necessarily need to be like art with a capital A, right? It could be stuff coming from the community. It could be stuff coming from, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't necessarily need to be like works of art that are $50,000, right? They don't need a Jasper Johns in their space. But like thinking about like I love sculpture, I love design, right? One of my favorite places in Boston is the Boston Public Library, the main one, because in the middle of it, there's a courtyard with a water fountain, right? Like thinking about designing spaces and making opportunities to enjoy art and to rest, right? That's also a big part of it, Reem, is like how can we use art to help people like to ground themselves and to like have some sense of solace from everything that's happening around them. Like, how can we create these spaces or utilize existing spaces to create those opportunities? So,
Like Keisha Darrett's Queen City piece out
yep,
in Virginia,
yep,
very moving history there, but also it is such a sanctuary.
yep, exactly, exactly.
I'm just kind of thinking about that for a minute. How do you find the middle ground? I mean, I'm thinking like somebody like Keith Haring who will go, draw all over
Yep,
subways, but also go to a children's hospital and create
yep.
these amazing murals. Like, what is I don't want to put you on the spot, like saying, what is the solution to spread art to those kids who are hanging out on the steps of the portrait gallery, but not necessarily going in without it, every single wall being covered by street art, but like what's the middle ground, I guess, to
Yeah,
appeal? I
yeah.
don't
And
know. Is that the right question?
no, it is. It's a great question. And I think that's where my education and public programs background comes in, right? Like, okay, why don't we bring the art to them? You know what I mean? Like, why do we not have an art cart? You know what I mean? Like, all these museums have art carts in the museum. Let's bring this art cart outside of the museum, right? There are all these, what is that? It's like, there's like this alleyway. It's like, is it Blagden Alley in DC? Where there's like a bunch of like graffiti and murals in there. Like, why not? There are all these walls,
Like
like
Wynwood in Miami kind of thing?
yeah, exactly. Like, why
Yeah.
not create spaces like that to like, you know what I mean? Like, why not just have and granted, this also is inviting stuff, but like, I love the idea that there are spaces where children can just come and draw and write. I currently work at a unit that deals a lot with community engagement. And one year they just created a mural, a wall where anybody could sort of come and draw and they exhibited this wall, right? Like, why not just like and bring the wall, right? And invite people to engage in this wall or have some sort of structured thing where you're working with a school, right? These children are coming from schools in the area. They're sitting on the steps, they're coming from the three schools that are in the area, right? Like, why not engage that school on creating something together? So the kids can actually feel more investment in the space that they're in and they have fun. So
So do you go after the teachers at the school? Do you go to the principals? Do you go to the community? I mean, like, who do you talk to make things like this work?
yeah, I mean, a lot of it is just, the thing about DC that makes it, DC and Maryland, that makes it so fantastic is that teachers are game for anything. As long as they have their principal support or the person in charge's support, they're really game for anything. And I've seen some really great examples of these museums being able to sort of utilize these really great partnerships and connections. Um, oh my goodness, one of my favorite groups in DC is I think it's DC Teachers for Social Justice. They're down for a good mural, it's like these groups are out there and there's after school programs and even within places like DCPS. I once worked for about a year and a half with this wonderful program that dealt with self-esteem for Black and brown girls. So like these wonderful organizations are out there and they're game and they want an opportunity to be able to give their students a chance to express themselves. Because that's the whole point, right? Is like giving young people an opportunity to express themselves, to have an outlet to do that. So.
Oh, and one last question for me. I know I've been kind of question hawking you.
No, no, it's great. It's great.
Um, when you think about like the role now versus the role, let's say 1950s, 1960s, of a content strategist or somebody putting together exhibitions and so forth, such an abundance of new technology, and I
Yep.
don't want to get into AI and stuff, but like I imagine the role has kind of shifted over the years. Are there opportunities to kind of have more exposure to art, or do you feel like it's kind of doing the reverse where there's more retraction and people are being less, I don't know, less inclined to go see a show?
So it's a kind of an interesting question, right? Because we're in a situation where, at least right now, people don't got a lot of money, right? So for the museums that are not free, it's become increasingly harder for folks to have the excuse to go do a thing, right? People are on their phones. Um, there are people going to see shows, right? Um, but also I've noticed this thing, not just in DC, but other places where like art and like participating in viewing and experiencing art has become less of a intellectual, like sort of soul-seeking experience and more just like a thing to do socially. Which is not a bad thing. It's just it's kind of shifted a little bit. I had a whole conversation with my students around like people who just go to museums to take selfies, right? Like the whole battle between like, are you going to actually engage or are you just going to take a selfie and then you go home? Like, is that still, can we count that as engagement? Right. So it's kind of this thing where, going to art and participating in these events is more of sort of a social status thing than like I am going to engage. However, we know that people are lonely. We know that they're bored. We know that they crave in-person interaction as much as people complain. They crave in-person interaction. They crave community, particularly young people. They really want community. They don't know how to create it or do it, or many of them don't. And so I think there is this really particular opportunity for us to think about how can we create these spaces for young people to come and convene and to see art as a way to be a catalyst for whatever it is that they're feeling, right? So when I am designing shows, I always go for an intergenerational approach. Like I want my shows to have multiple generations accounted for in the show because I want old and young people to come together because they're not. They're currently not right now. And so any opportunity I can, particularly that's why I love Reem, I love a good open call. Like you can have me do an open call anytime, right? For those of you who are watching, you need a curator with open call. I'm ready. Okay. I'm ready right now. Because I do think I have a responsibility to create these activations. And if I can do that through my show, Reem was there during my artist talk. There were people from all different sorts of generations that were there at that artist talk. Folks that probably would never meet in any other circumstance were there, and they were making with the Aude graphic. People are talking about Vietnam. People are talking about right now, right? Like, how do we create these interventions through these shows where we can bring all these people together? So,
Actually, I do want to piggyback on that in the sense that when we talk about the democratization of art, I think that for so long, so many people have not seen
yep,
themselves in museums.
exactly,
So that's
exactly.
another aspect of
Yep,
it. To this day, the National Museum of African American History and Culture remains the most visited
yep,
museum in Washington, D.C. And that is because it has given Black people a place where they are
exactly.
finally seen and heard. And so if we think about that throughout the city or in the country in different exhibitions, we do all want to be seen. For so long, it has been through the Eurocentric lens of curating. So it's no longer the case. And so I think that's another aspect of democratizing art.
Yeah, and I think Reem too, that's why I focus on emerging artists. Like that's why I like to focus on emerging artists, right? There's so many great artists in DC, but for some artists, they're the same artists I see again being chosen for commissions, being chosen for this and that again and again and again, right? And I'm just like, I want to be a part of the group that is making space for multiple people to have a seat at this table and to be seen and shown. And it's become increasingly, I mean, we might talk about this. Art schools are closing across the country, right? There are fewer opportunities for people to train or learn or be engaged in artistic practice, right? A lot of people are doing it on their own now. A lot of people have done it on their own, but even increasingly now, more people are doing it on their own. And so it's like we have to think about who's being let in the door and creating opportunities for those folks who may have a harder time um, getting their work out there.
I was asking about the process of which you mentioned that you were thinking about curating a show and you had an idea of what's your process in terms of creating the show, getting a space, contacting artists. I mean, how do you go about I guess, the business
Yeah.
process of it?
Yeah, so I've been really lucky, Rita, in the fact that, because I've done a couple of open calls, now I kind of have like a Rolodex, now I have like a Rolodex of people who I'm like, oh, their work is really interesting, or I like the materiality of their work. I wonder what would happen if I paired like these three people together or these two people together, because I think their work blends really nicely in terms of either what they're talking about, the type of art that they're doing, or even like, right, I was just talking about a show about color, right? But in terms of my process, um, so I was telling Reem, I think of each show kind of like a puzzle. Like I have the puzzle pieces are kind of there on the floor, and I kind of have to like piece it all together. And in order to sort of piece the puzzle, the first thing is like, what is and this is the educator in me, Rita, what is the underlying question that I want to answer? Right? Like I think of backwards design as like what do I want people, what is the question that I want to ask? Excuse me. Um, or what is the question that I want to ask and or what is actually happening right now in our world? So those are the two big questions that inform my work. Like what is the question that I want to ask? And or like what is happening in this space and how can what it is that I design can be in dialogue with that. And so with every exhibit, I think about a big picture question. Sometimes the question is given to me, sometimes I create the question myself. Um, and I've experimented with doing exhibits for like established galleries, organizations like Washington Studio School. I recently took a chance and took a commission to design an exhibition for a charter school having its 25th anniversary. And so for that exhibit, it was so different because one, I'm working with partners who necessarily are not from the art space and don't understand the labor, the money, the time, all the materials that it takes to put up an exhibition. So I'm both doing teaching, right? I'm teaching these things and I'm trying to design an exhibit that encompasses 25 years of organization's history. And at first I didn't have a space. So it's like, how do you design something you don't know what's going to look like because you don't have a space? So how can you design something that could be applied to any kind of space? So the partner that I was working with, we decided on a timeline. Like we were like, you know what? We don't know what the space is going to look like. What is something easy that we can sort of encompass visual, text, and still sort of show the highlights of this organization? A timeline, right? How do we make the timeline funky? How do we make it not like something you'd see at an airport or somewhere? And so we worked with someone who does exhibition design because like I'm a curator, but I'm not a tech reader. I don't do tech. Okay. I don't do tech. I'm old school. I draw everything. So I like draw like what on each wall, what I want something to look like. And then I work with someone who does exhibition design to like make it what it would look like prettier on a wall. Um, and sometimes that layout is very basic. Sometimes it's Canva, right? Sometimes we have access to software. Um, But then sort of once the idea, we think about materials, we think about, we think about things like one of the things that we didn't think about, which you should never not think about, is the wall, right? Certain walls can handle certain types of vinyl, certain walls cannot and cause a lot of damage. And so even thinking about things like that in the process is very important because one, that costs you a lot of money. And two, it's also thinking about how people will like walk throughout the space too as well. So the concept, working back and forth, sending the concept back and forth with my client, getting feedback, having to explain to them, this is not how, we cannot have pizza boxes on the wall. Just like stuff like that. Um, and then, hopefully coming to a consensus and working with a fantastic mounter to put everything on that wall. So,
This is great and so provocative, Ashleigh. I am
thank you.
thinking about a lot of things, but I haven't articulated my questions. But what you're doing is so creative.
Oh, thank you.
Um, have you ever gone into a space and said, "Oh my God, this space just needs XYZ," and tried to convince the space to open itself up for
Oh,
something? Like I'm thinking of hospitals.
oh,
I'm a
yeah.
doctor, and I just see such horrible, sort of art that is mostly blue because the
Yep.
yellows
Yep.
and the reds have gone away with the sun. And I just think about art as healing.
Yes. So two
And
things. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
yeah,
off.
no, 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 go ahead.
So two things. One, so it's really funny. When I go into hospitals sometimes, Mariana, I think about when I was a kid and went to the pediatrician because pediatricians
Right,
sometimes have very different walls. It's very creative, very
right,
playful. Like they've
or
got, and I'm
not.
just like, why do they stop doing that when they like transition out of being with a pediatrician, right? Like that should continue, right? If I'm going to go to my ENT doctor and I'm freaked out, like shouldn't I be seeing waves or something? You know what I mean? Like shouldn't I be seeing something
Yeah,
like calming on on the walls? And the second part of your question is I've not gone into a space where
mhm,
I've been like, oh man, I wish they would do something with this. But because I go to museums very frequently, I've become really unfortunately snotty about like particularly new museums that are being built, and I just see all this space that's not being used.
right.
Like I walked into one museum that had a big reopening this year and it's beautiful, but they focused more on the design of the building than actually maximizing the
Yeah,
space. And
I
I think that
see.
when you're designing any building, particularly a museum, you have to think about the future, right? Because you will need more offices, you
Right.
will need more wall space for exhibits, and there's just so much nothing. And just like
No.
walls and hallways. And I'm like, why?
Yeah.
And so it's hard for me to go into museums sometimes because I'm just like, mm,
Yeah.
mm.
Yeah. We need a revolution.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like at least put in like a resting center or some benches. You know what I mean? Like if you're gonna
Right.
use all
Right.
the space, like at the very least,
Absolutely.
have a place where people can
Yes.
sit. Denise, I see your hand.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you. You're a powerhouse. You've been just making
Yes.
opportunity for artists. I just think that's so important because the ecosystem, we don't think about it that way, but we need you. But most importantly, I wanted to know who were your role models? What made you become so activated? You're a visionaire, like, and it's just fascinating to hear you talk. I love it.
So a lot of the people that inspire me are not art people, are not art people. When I was younger, I really loved Thelma Golden. Like when I was in college, I loved her. She's still fabulous. She's still a powerhouse. She, now works for the Obama Museum and she runs the Studio Museum in Harlem. Um, but for me, it was like the women who just like got stuff done, like the Fannie Lou Hamers, right? Like these women in history who like took nothing and made it into something. I will say in terms of Boston, Elma Lewis,
Mm.
Denise, right? So
Yes,
if you're
yes,
familiar
yes.
with Elma Lewis, she created both an art school because a lot of African American artists weren't able to actually attend like the MFA Bostons
Mm,
and all these schools
yeah.
back in the day. And then she also created the National Museum of African American Artists that's in Boston right now. And so I think about women like her who had to suffer through way more than like I have to right now, even
Mm,
though I still have to deal with bears. And I think about for me, the inspiration is I don't have to wait for them. I create my own stuff.
Yeah.
Right. That's the inspiration. I don't have to wait for anybody else. I create my own stuff. And not only do I do that, there are people who feel that same way too. And we create together. Right. That's the thing. I don't do this by myself. I have Reem, right? I have you. I have all these people who are very committed. We don't need them to open the doors for us. We create our own stuff. Right. And we bring people in too, because it's not about just us. It's about everybody else.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. This has been absolutely fantastic, and
Good.
I can't wait to see who you bring to our program in 27 with artist talks. For I think it'll just be really help open up our world a little bit too, especially with some new young blood out there. Again, everyone, we'll see everyone. I think we have a little bit of time off because of Labor Day, so our next meeting is September 12th with Ira Talman, hosted by Julia Bloom, who we mentioned today.
Oh, awesome.
But thank you to Reem, and thank you, of course, to our artist, Ashleigh. You guys were awesome, and yeah.
Thank you for
Thank
doing
you.
it. Thank you, Ashleigh. Thank you, Jordan and
Thank
Mariana.
you all.
Everyone
Oh,
have a
hey,
fabulous.
Ray was in there.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Take care of yourselves.
Have a great Labor Day.